we are now going to discuss third feature of behaviorism, which is called reciprocal determinism. Reciprocal determinism was introduced by Albert Bandura in 1977. He is a professor in Stanford University and psychologist who introduced social learning theory. According to this theory, it explains behavior in terms of interaction between cognitive, behavioral, and environmental determinants. If we look back, the other features such as Pavlovian conditioning and classical conditioning, they highlighted the association process and 3 stages of the conditioning process. In this theory, we see the interaction between cognitive, behavioral, and environmental factors. So, this theory does take into account the cognitive process of one's ability to develop a behavior in terms of having interaction with the behavioral and environmental factors. So, there are 3 things that need to be taken care of in terms of understanding of this particular theory, which is social learning theory. Focuses on interaction between the external stimuli and internal cognition in a social context. It proposes, number 1, mediating processes that occur between stimuli and responses. And second is the behavior is learned from the environment through the process of observational learning. Let's see how we can develop the understanding of behaviorist model and the cognitive model. In order to understand the interaction that takes place, and especially the ideas of this social learning theory, let's see what behaviorist model is. That you have the stimulus in the environment, but then you have black box, which cannot be studied. That's the middle part. And then you have the response, which is the behavior. So you know the stimulus, you know the response, but this box is something which is not known, something which you cannot study. Now look at the cognitive model. You have the input in the environment. Then you have the meditational process, which is the mental event. And then you have the output behavior. So you can observe, you can study what takes place here as a mental event. There are 4 meditational processes proposed by Bandura. Number 1, attention process. Number 2, retention process. Number 3, reproduction process. And number 4 is motivational process. Attention process means that to the extent which we are exposed or notice a certain behavior. For a behavior to be imitated, it has to grab our attention. There are so many behaviors that we notice every day, but we don't find them noteworthy, or we do not pay attention to each and every behavior. Attention is therefore extremely important in whether a behavior has an influence in others imitating it or not. So attention is something that we are very, very careful about, and we pay attention to for imitation purpose. So attention is very important for us, especially to imitate certain behavior. Retention. Retention is remembering of a behavior. How well the behavior is remembered. The behavior may be noticed, but it is not always remembered, which obviously prevents imitation. It is important, therefore, that memory of behavior is formed to be performed by the observer later on. Much of social learning is not immediate, so this process is especially important in these cases. Even if the behavior is reproduced shortly after seeing it, there has to be a memory to refer to. Third is reproduction process. Reproduction process is the ability to perform the behavior that the model has just demonstrated. Now this theory has introduced the concept of models. Model can be any leading personality, celebrity, parents, friends, relative. We see much behavior on a daily basis that we would like to be able to imitate, but this is not always possible. For example, maybe an aged person or an old man of 90s might like to watch a dance or would appreciate it, but would not be able to perform it physically. The last process is called motivational process. The will to perform the behavior. This is very much related to the reward and punishment that follows a behavior, and that leads to the motivation or the demotivation on the part of the learner. Bandura suggests most human behavior is learned by observation. Observing the behavior of others, which mean models. So models are to be observed for imitating and to be adopted in terms of their behavior as an excellent behavior, using the information to imitate as a guide for our own behavior, that we would like to have or we would like to demonstrate the similar behavior that we observe in our models. Reinforcement or punishment determines the behavior. Positive reinforcement would lead to the development of positive behavior, or negative or punishment would lead to the discouragement of a certain behavior. This leads to the reciprocal determinism. When we look at reciprocal determinism, we see three areas: cognitive factors, environmental factors, and behavioral factors. So cognitive factors are related to knowledge, expectations, and attitudes. Environmental factors are concerned with social norms, access in community, influence on others, and behavioral factors are related to skills, practice, and self-efficacy. Reciprocal determinism is personal influences, environmental factors, and behavior itself function as independent rather than autonomous determinants. The effect of each of three components is conditional on the other. For example, the environment is a potentiality whose effects depends on the organism's understanding of it. Similarly, a person plays a different role and has different expectations across different situations. People seek out and create the environment to which they respond. Bandura is suggesting in part that people do not simply react to the external environment, rather external factors influence behavior. These factors, they influence one's behavior. He very famously pointed out, and I quote, "Because people's conceptions, their behaviors, and their environment are reciprocal determinants of each other, individuals are neither powerless objects controlled by environmental forces nor entirely free agents who can do whatever they choose." So all these factors are determinants and they are interdependent. All of the three are interdependent on each other. To conclude, reciprocal determinism is based on cognitive, environmental, and behavioral factors, which form the basis of social learning theory.